My name is Kimberly Chew, and I'm a psychologist and also the clinic manager at Annabelle Psychology. I personally have been at Annabelle Psychology for about just over 1.5 years now, and in total I've been practicing for about 7 years.
Maybe just to give a brief introduction to what PTSD is and how does someone who suffers from PTSD, how does the person feel like?
First and foremost, post-traumatic stress disorder, or also known as PTSD, is a psychiatric disorder that may occur in people who have experienced or witnessed a traumatic event, such as a natural disaster, this could be war, or a serious accident, or they themselves have personally been threatened with death, violence, or serious injury. So PTSD can be extremely distressing and difficult for anyone who is experiencing it. And this can be challenging for a person to manage on their own. As part of this condition, people with PTSD have intense and disturbing thoughts and feelings about their traumatic experience. So this is even long after the traumatic experience has ended. So they might experience things like involuntary flashbacks, nightmares, intrusive thoughts, where they feel like they are reliving the event all over again. And this would be accompanied by things like feelings of sadness, fear, and anger. So individuals will often try their very best to avoid situations or people that remind them of the traumatic event and that are what we call triggering for them.
So how common is PTSD in Asia and in Singapore?
It's difficult to say because currently there are no statistics for Singapore specifically, but to give kind of like a ballpark kind of figure here, understanding from research is that approximately 1 in about 11 people will experience PTSD in their lifetime. What we do know also is that PTSD can occur in all people, so regardless of things like ethnicity, nationality, culture, or age. So really this is something that can affect absolutely everyone out there.
What does PTSD do to the brain as well as to the body?
When it comes to PTSD, there are several parts of the brain that are involved. So neurologically, first, let us consider what happens when we are faced with danger. Okay, so let's think about when we're faced with danger or potentially the threat of danger. So the first part of the brain that we're looking at is the amygdala. So that is the brain's what we call alarm system. And this sounds when there is a potential threat or danger, which causes the body and the brain to go into what we call fight or flight mode. Yeah, so fight or flight mode prepares the body to respond by either, number one, dealing with it. So that would be the fight part, or getting away from it. So that would be the flight part. So as the brain prepares for this, there are a whole variety of physiological changes that our body would undergo. So blood and oxygen is redirected to where it is needed, so most likely our extremities. So causing physiological changes such as things like increased heart rate, you will see shallow breathing, and things like sweating or maybe like butterflies in our stomach. As our body is in this fight or flight mode, the amygdala communicates with this other part of the brain that's very important here called the hypothalamus. So the hypothalamus releases the stress hormone cortisol. So the stress hormone is being released during this time, and then another part of the brain called the prefrontal cortex is activated. So this part kind of is responsible for sizing up whether the body needs to stay on high alert or whether the brain should start calming the body down. So in that sense, the prefrontal cortex really serves as like a braking system that helps the body to return to normal. So returning to that normal kind of like calm state once the threat has passed, or if the brain assessed that, this isn't really a threat that causes any particular danger. So let's think about people who have PTSD. We've talked about the amygdala, we've talked about the hypothalamus, and we've talked about the prefrontal cortex. So for a person who suffers from PTSD or currently has PTSD, their amygdala is hyperactive. So what that means is that it might respond too strongly to the threat of danger. While the prefrontal cortex is hypoactive, which means that it's not working well enough to kind of step on the brakes when it needs to. So this is really the combination of this hyperactive amygdala and the hypoactive prefrontal cortex is really the perfect storm, which causes individuals with PTSD to feel anxious, so really around anything that is slightly related to the original trauma. They would also have strong physical reactions, so bodily reactions to situations that shouldn't provoke fear. So really just that feeling of jumpiness or really feeling on edge. And finally, they'd also avoid situations that might trigger those intense emotions or reactions. So essentially looking at these three parts of the brain, neurologically, this is what is happening in the brain and the body for individuals who are currently struggling with PTSD.
When and how does PTSD get triggered?
So basically, when we talk about being triggered, this can happen really at any time. And it's very interesting because triggers can include things like smells, so sounds, situations. It could include tastes or even words that are associated with the traumatic event. So for example, for someone who may have been physically assaulted or maybe abused by somebody wearing a particular type of cologne, for example, when the person who is experiencing PTSD so happens to get a smell of this cologne, it could trigger symptoms. So symptoms of post-traumatic stress, and this can be very, very distressing for a lot of people, because a lot of the time people don't take note of these triggers initially, and that they're just kind of going about their day and something happens and it kind of throws them, puts them in a bit of a difficult kind of like situation where they would become highly distressed and it would be very uncomfortable for them. So part and parcel of working with a mental health professional would help to kind of highlight and identify a lot of these triggers, but also to kind of work to process a lot of the difficulties that person has gone through, such to alleviate symptoms and reduce the frequency and intensity of triggers and symptoms.
Maybe anything else you would like to share with like the general public in terms of PTSD education, or some misconceptions of PTSD that people usually have?
Some of the misconceptions that we've come across quite frequently is that PTSD is something that is limited to soldiers. I think a lot of the time when we think about PTSD, and especially I think media, popular culture has a lot to do with this, is that we associate PTSD with war veterans or people who have experienced or gone through war. So when we think about maybe somebody saying something like, saying to a loved one, oh, maybe you have post-traumatic stress disorder, some people might think, well, I'm not a soldier, I didn't go to war, this isn't something that could potentially affect me, and therefore they might not come forward to seek help. But of course, something to be mindful of here is that really PTSD can affect everyone. It can be anyone, from children to teenagers to adults. This is not limited by anything, ethnicity, nationality, culture, location, anything like that. It's very real and it can happen to any one of us. So don't feel that this is something that is just limited to soldiers. I feel that it can affect us because sometimes we experience some really unfortunate events, and it would definitely be helpful to talk to somebody, so to talk to a professional, to be able to process this and to alleviate any symptoms and reduce any distress that you might be experiencing.
To prevent people from not coming forward to get help.
Yeah, right? Thinking that I'm not a soldier, I don't have PTSD. Yeah.
But that's not really the case, as I think we have mentioned previously. It's really very near us. It's everywhere.
Absolutely.
It can happen to everyone, right?
Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for your regular dose of Asian health information.